Hello, my lovelies.
So, to celebrate nothing in particular. Oh, by the way, hello. To celebrate nothing in particular, tonight's beverage is a white birch beer float with um, cookies and cream ice cream. So, we are going to be starting on the House of Many Ways to celebrate the fact that we just finished the book that came before it, Howl's Moving Castle. So, I hope you enjoy it. Overall, I will say that Howl's Moving Castle is the better book. However, one of the most important characters in this book is a dog. So, I mean, really, slightly better plot line. Main character has a dog. It's very difficult math here, is what I'm saying. Um, so, anyway, Chapter 1, in which Charmaine is volunteered to look after a wizard's house. Charmaine must do it, said Aunt Sempronia. We can't leave Great Uncle William to face this on his own. Your Great Uncle William, said Mrs. Baker, isn't he. She coughed and lowered her voice, because this, to her mind, was not quite nice. Isn't he a wizard? Of course, said Aunt Sempronia. But he has. Here, too, she lowered her voice. He has a growth, you know, on his insides, and only the elves can help him. They have to carry him off in order to cure him, you see, and someone has to look after his house. Spells, you know, they escape if there's no one there to watch them, and I am far too busy to do it. My stray dog's charity alone. Me too. We're up to our ears in wedding cake orders this month, Mrs. Baker said hastily. Sam was only saying this morning. Well, then it has to be Charmaine, Aunt Sempronia decreed. Surely she's old enough by now. Said Mrs. Baker. They both looked across the parlor to where Mrs. Baker's daughter sat, deep in a book as usual, with her long, thin body bent into what sunlight came in past Mrs. Baker's geraniums, her red hair pinned up in a sort of bird's nest, and her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She held one of her father's huge, juicy pasties in one hand and munched it as she read. Crumbs kept falling on her book, and she brushed them off with the pasty when they fell on the page that she was reading. Did you hear us, dear? Mrs. Baker said anxiously. No, Charmaine said with her mouth full. What? Well, that's settled then, Aunt Sempronia said. I'll leave it to you to explain to her, Berenice, dear. She stood up majestically, shaking out the folds of her stiff silk dress, and then of her silk parasol. I'll be back to fetch her tomorrow morning. Now I'd better go and tell poor great Uncle William that Charmaine will be taking care of things for him. She swept out of the parlor, leaving Mrs. Baker to wish that her husband's aunt was not so rich nor so bossy, and to wonder how she was going to explain to Charmaine, let alone to Sam. Sam never allowed Charmaine to do anything that was not utterly respectable. Nor did Mrs. Baker either, except when Aunt Sempronia took a hand. Aunt Sempronia, meanwhile, mounted into her smart little pony trap and had her groom drive her to beyond the other side of town, where great Uncle William lived. I've fixed it all up, she announced, sailing through the magic ways to where great Uncle William sat glumly writing in his study. My great niece Charmaine is going to come here tomorrow. She will see you on your way and look after you when you come back. In between, she will take care of the house for you. How very kind of her, said great Uncle William. I take it she is well versed in magic, then? I have no idea, said Aunt Sempronia. What I do know is that she has never had her nose out of a book, never does a hand's turn in the house, and is treated like a sacred object by both of her parents. It will do her good to do something normal for a change. Oh dear, said great Uncle William. Thank you for warning me. I shall take precautions then. Do that, said Aunt Sempronia. And you'd better make sure that there is plenty of food in the place. I've never known a girl who eats so much, and remains thin as a witch's besom with it. I never understood it. I'll bring her here tomorrow before the elves come, then. She turned and left. Thank you, Great Uncle William said weakly to her stiff, rustling back. Dear, dear, he added as the front door slammed. Ah, well, one has to be grateful to one's relatives, I suppose. I fear the grasshoppers are overdoing it with ambiance, my dear. Charmaine, oddly enough, was quite grateful to Aunt Sempronia, too. Not that she was in the least bit grateful for being volunteered to look after an old, sick wizard whom she had never met. She might have asked me, she said rather often to her mother. I think she knew you would say no, dear, Mrs. Baker suggested eventually. Well, I might have, Charmaine said. Or I might not have. Dear, I'm not expecting you to enjoy it, Mrs. Baker said tremulously. It's not at all nice. It's just that it would be so very kind. Well, you know I'm not kind, Charmaine said, and she went away upstairs to her white, frilly bedroom, where she sat at her nice desk, staring out of her window at the roofs, towers, and chimneys of high Norland City, and then up to the blue mountains beyond. The truth was, this was the chance that she had been longing for. She was tired of being respectable, or of her respectable school, and very tired of living at home with her mother treating her as if Charmaine were a tigress no one was sure to tame, and her father forbidding her to do things because they were not nice, or not safe, or not usual. This was a chance to leave home and do something, the one thing Charmaine had always wanted to do. It was worth putting up with a wizard's house just for that. She wondered if she had the courage to write the letter that went with it. For a long time, she had no courage at all. She sat and stared at the clouds piling along the peaks of the mountains, white and purple, making shapes like fat animals and thin, swooping dragons. She stared until the clouds had wisped away into nothing but faint mist against a blue sky. Then she said, Now or nothing. After that, she sighed, fetched her glasses up on the chain that hung round her neck, and got out her good pen and her best writing paper. She wrote in her best writing, Your Majesty, ever since I was a small child and first heard of your great collection of books and manuscripts, I have longed to work in your library. Although I know that you yourself, with the aid of your daughter, Her Royal Highness Princess Hilda, are personally engaged in the long and difficult task of sorting and listing the contents of the Royal Library, I nevertheless hope that you might appreciate my help. Since I am of age, I wish to apply for the post of librarian assistant in the Royal Library. I hope your Majesty will not find my application too presumptuous. Yours truly, Charmaine Baker, 12 Corn Street, High Norland City. Charmaine sat back and reread her letter. There was no way, she thought, that writing like this to the old king would be anything other than sheer cheek, but it seemed to her that the letter was quite a good one. The one thing in it that was dubious was the I am of age. She knew what that was supposed to mean, that a person was 21, or at least 18, but she felt it was not exactly a lie. She'd not said what age she was of, after all, and she hadn't either said that she was hugely learned or highly qualified, because she knew that she was not. She hadn't even said that she loved books more than anything else in the world, although this was perfectly true. She would just have to trust her love of books shone through. I'm quite sure the king will just scrumple the letter up and throw it on the fire, she thought. But at least I tried. She went out and posted the letter, feeling very brave and very defiant. The next morning, Aunt Sempronia arrived in her pony trap and loaded Charmaine into it along with a neat carpet bag that Mrs. Baker had packed full of Charmaine's clothes, and a much larger bag that Mr. Baker had packed, bulging with pasties and tasties, buns, flans, and tarts. So large was the second bag, and smelling so strongly of savory herbs, gravy, cheese, fruit, jam, and spices, that the groom, driving the trap, turned round and sniffed in astonishment, and even Aunt Sempronia's stately nostrils flared. Well, you'll not starve, child, she said. Drive on. But the groom had to wait until Mrs. Baker had embraced Charmaine and said, I know I can trust you, dear, to be good and tidy and considerate. Well, that's a lie, Charmaine thought. She doesn't trust me an inch. Then Charmaine's father hurried up to peck a kiss on Charmaine's cheek. We know you'll not let us down, Charmaine, he said. That's another lie, Charmaine thought. You know I will. And we'll miss you, my love, her mother said, nearly in tears. Oh, that may not be a lie, Charmaine thought, in some surprise, though it beats me why they even like me. Drive on, Aunt Sempronia said sturdily, and the groom did. When the pony was sedately ambling through the streets, she said, Now, Charmaine, I know your parents have given you the best of everything, and you've never had to do a thing for yourself in your life. Are you prepared to look for yourself for a change? Oh, yes, Charmaine said devoutly. And the house? And the old man? Aunt Sempronia persisted. Well, I'll do my best, Charmaine said. She was afraid Aunt Sempronia would turn round and drive her straight back home if she didn't say this. You've had a good education, haven't you? Aunt Sempronia said. Even music, Charmaine admitted rather sulkily. Even music, Charmaine added rather sulkily. She added hastily, but I wasn't any good at it, so don't expect me to play soothing tunes to great Uncle William. I don't, Aunt Sempronia retorted. As he's a wizard, he can probably make his own soothing tunes. I was simply trying to find out whether you've had proper grounding in magic. You have, haven't you? Charmaine's insides seemed to drop her way downward somewhere, and she felt as if they were taking the blood from her face with them. She did not dare confess that she knew not the first thing about magic. Her parents, particularly Mrs. Baker, did not think magic was nice. And theirs was such a respectable part of town that Charmaine's school never taught anyone magic. If anyone wanted to learn anything so vulgar, they had to go to a private tutor instead, and Charmaine knew her parents would never have paid for any such lessons. She began. Luckily, Aunt Sempronia simply continued, Living in a house full of magic is no joke. Oh, I won't ever think of it as a joke, Charmaine said earnestly. Good, said Aunt Sempronia, and sat back. The pony clopped on and on. They clopped through the royal square, past the royal mansion, looming at one end of it, with its golden roof flashing in the sun, and on through Market Square, where Charmaine was seldom allowed to go. She looked wistfully at the stalls and at all the people buying things and chattering, and stared backwards at the place that they came into the older part of town. At the place as they came into the older part of town. Here the houses were so tall and colorful, so different from one another. Each one seemed to have steeper gables and more oddly placed windows than the one before it. That Charmaine began to have hopes that living in Great Uncle William's house might prove to be very interesting after all. But the pony clopped onwards through the dingier, poorer parts, and then past mere cottages, and then out amongst the fields and hedges, where a great cliff leaned over the road, and only the occasional small house stood backed into the hedgerows, and the mountains towered closer and closer above. Charmaine began to think that they were going out of High Norland and into another country altogether. What would it be? Strangia? Montalbino? She wished she'd paid more attention to geography lessons. But just as she was wishing this, the groom drew up at a small, mouse-colored house, crouching at the back of the long front garden. Charmaine looked at it across its small iron gate and felt utterly disappointed. It was the most boring house she'd ever seen. It had a window on either side of its brown front door, and the mouse-colored roof came down above them like a scowl. There did not seem to be any upstairs at all. I love you, weirdo. Which one are you chewing on? I love you, weirdo. Such a strange dog. I love you. If you want to go to bed, you can go to bed yourself. I am busy reading to my best beloveds. She is doing her very best lamp impression. So she has 2 more weeks of bandages, and then she will be healed. She will be all happy and safe again. And we can go chasing squirrels. Here we are, Aunt Sempronia said cheerfully. She got down, clattered open the little iron gate, and led the way up the path to the front door. Charmaine prowled gloomily after her while the groom followed them with Charmaine's 2 bags. The garden on either side of the path appeared to consist entirely of hydrangea bushes, blue, green, and mauve. I don't suppose you'll have to look after the garden, Aunt Sempronia said airily. I should hope not, Charmaine thought. I'm fairly sure William employs a gardener, Aunt Sempronia said. Well, I hope he does, Charmaine said. The most she knew about gardens was the baker's own backyard, which contained one large mulberry tree and a rose bush, plus the window boxes where her mother grew runner beans. She knew there was earth under the plants, and that the earth contained worms. She shuddered. Aunt Sempronia clattered briskly at the knocker on the front door, and then pushed her way into the house, calling, "Hoo! I've brought Charmaine for you." "Oh, thank you kindly," said Great Uncle William. The front door led straight into a musty living room where Great Uncle William was sitting in a musty mouse-colored armchair. There was a large leather suitcase behind him, as if he were all ready to depart. "I'm pleased to meet you, my dear," he said to Charmaine. "How do you do, sir?" Charmaine replied politely. Before either of them could say anything else, Aunt Sempronia said, "Well, then, I'll love you and leave you. Put her bags down here," she said to her groom. The groom obediently dumped the bags down just inside the front door and went away again. Aunt Sempronia followed him with a sizzle of expensive silks, calling, "Goodbye, both of you," as she went. The front door clanged shut, leaving Charmaine and Great Uncle William staring at each other. Great Uncle William was a small man and mostly bald, except for some locks of fine silvery hair streaked across his rather domed head. He sat in a stiff, bent, crumpled way that showed Charmaine he was in quite a lot of pain. She was surprised to find that she felt sorry for him, but she did wish that he wouldn't stare at her so steadily. It made her feel guilty, and his lower eyelids drooped from his tired blue eyes, showing the insides all red like blood. Charmaine disliked blood almost as much as she disliked earthworms. "Well, you seem a very tall, competent-looking young lady," Great Uncle William said. His voice was tired and gentle. "The red hair is a good sign to my mind. Very good. Do you think you can manage here while I'm gone? The place is a little disordered, I'm afraid." "Well, I expect so," Charmaine said. The musty room seemed quite tidy to her. "Can you tell me some of the things I ought to do?" "Though I hope I shan't be here long," she thought, "once the king replies to my letter." "As to that," said Great Uncle William, "the usual household things, of course, but magical. Naturally, most of it's magical. As I wasn't sure what grade of magic you'll have reached, I took some steps." "Horrors," Charmaine thought. "He thinks that I know magic." She tried to interrupt Great Uncle William to explain, but at that moment they were both interrupted. The front door clattered open, and a procession of tall, tall elves walked quietly in. They were all most medically dressed in white, and there was no expression on their beautiful faces at all. Charmaine stared at them, utterly unnerved by their beauty, their height, their neutrality, and above all, by their complete silence. One of them moved her gently aside and stood where she was put, feeling clumsy and disorderly, while the rest clustered around Great Uncle William, with their dazzling fair heads bent over him. Charmaine was not sure what they did, but in next to no time, Great Uncle William was dressed in a white robe, and they were lifting him out of his chair. There were what seemed to be 3 red apples stuck to his head. Charmaine could see that he was asleep. Haven't you forgotten his suitcase?" she said as they carried him away towards the door. "No need for it," one of the elves said, holding the door open for the others to ease Great Uncle William out through it. After that, they were all going away down the garden path. Charmaine dashed to the open front door and called after them, "How long is he going to be away?" It suddenly seemed urgent to know how long she was going to be left in charge here. "As long as it takes," another of the elves replied. Then they were all gone before they had reached the garden gate. And since that was both very pleasant and very quick, let's go ahead and skip to Chapter 2. Chapter 2, in which Charmaine explores the house. I can show off my favorite tree. Well, one of my favorite trees. Charmaine stared at the empty path for a while and then shut the door with a bang. Now what do I do? She said to the deserted, musty room. You'll have to tidy the kitchen, I'm afraid, my dear, said Great Uncle William's tired, kindly voice out of thin air. I apologize for leaving so much laundry. Please open my suitcase for more complicated instructions. Charmaine shot the suitcase a look. So, Great Uncle William had meant to leave it then. In a minute, she said to it. I haven't unpacked for myself yet. She picked up her 2 bags and marched with them to the only other door. It was at the back of the room, and then Charmaine had tried to open it with the hand that held the food bag, then with the hand that then with that hand, and with both bags in the other hand, and finally with both hands and both bags on the floor. And she found it led to the kitchen. She stared for a moment. Then she dragged her 2 bags round the door just as she was shutting and started some more. What a mess, she said. It ought to have been a comfortable, spacious kitchen. It had a big window looking out onto the mountains, where sunlight came warmly pouring through. Unfortunately, the sunlight only served to highlight the enormous stacks of plates and cups piled into the sink, and on the draining board and down on the floor beside the sink. The sunlight then went on, and Charmaine's dismayed eyes went with it, to cast a golden glow over the 2 big canvas laundry bags leaning beside the sink. They were stuffed so full with dirty washing that Great Uncle William had been using them as a shelf for a pile of dirty saucepans and a frying pan or so. Charmaine's eyes traveled from there to the table in the middle of the room. Here was where Great Uncle William appeared to keep his supply of 30 or so teapots, and the same number of milk jugs, not to speak of several that had once held gravy. It was all quite neat in its way, Charmaine thought. Just, well, crowded and not clean. Suppose you have been ill, Charmaine said grudgingly to the thin air. There was no reply this time. Cautiously, she went over to the sink where, she had a feeling, something was missing. It took her a moment or so to realize that there were no taps. Probably this house was so far outside of town that no water pipes had been laid. When she looked through the window, she could see a small yard outside and a pump in the middle of it. So I'm supposed to go and pump water and then bring it in? And then what? Charmaine demanded. She looked over the dark, empty fireplace. It was summer after all, so naturally there was no fire, nor anything to burn that she could see. I heat the water, she said. In a dirty saucepan, I suppose. Come to think of it, how do I wash? Can't I even have a bath? Or can't I ever have a bath? Doesn't he have any bedroom or bathroom at all? She rushed to the small door beyond the fireplace and dragged it open. All Great Uncle William's doors seemed to need the strength of 10 men to open, she thought angrily. She could almost feel the weight of magic holding them shut. She found herself looking into a small pantry. It had nothing on its shelves apart from a small crock of butter, a stale-looking loaf, and a large bag mysteriously labeled Cibus Caninicus. That seemed to be full of soap flakes. And piled into the back of it were 2 more large laundry bags as full as the ones in the kitchen. I shall scream, Charmaine said. How could Aunt Sempronia do this to me? How could Mother let her do it? In a moment of despair, Charmaine could only think of doing what she had always did in a crisis. Bury herself in a book. She dragged her 2 bags over to the crowded table and sat herself down in one of the 2 chairs there. She unbuckled the carpet bag, fetched her glasses up onto her nose, and dug eagerly among the clothes for the books that she had put out for Mother to pack for her. Her hands meant nothing but softness. The only hard thing proved to be the big bar of soap among her washing things. Charmaine threw it across the room into the empty hearth and dug further. I don't believe this, she said. She must have put them in first, right at the bottom. She turned the bag upside down and shook everything out onto the floor. Out fell wads of beautifully folded skirts, dresses, stockings, blouses, 2 knitted jackets, lace petticoats, and enough other underclothes for a year. On top of those flopped her new slippers. And after that, the bag was flat and empty. Charmaine, nevertheless, felt all the way round inside of the bag before she threw it aside, let her glasses drop to the end of their chain, and wondered whether to cry. Mrs. Baker had actually forgotten to pack the books. Well, Charmaine said, after an interval of blinking and swallowing, I suppose I've never been away from home before. Next time I go anywhere, I shall have to pack the bag myself and fill it with books. I shall have to make the best of it for now. So, making the best of it, she heaved the other bag onto the crowded table and shoved to make room for it. This shunted 4 milk jugs and a teapot off onto the floor. And I don't care, Charmaine said as they fell. Somewhat to their relief, the milk jugs were empty and simply bounced, and the teapot did not break either. It just lay on its side, leaking tea onto the floor. That's probably the good side to magic, Charmaine said, glumly digging out the topmost meat pasty. She flung her skirts into a bundle between her knees, put her elbows on the table, and took a huge, comforting, savory bite from the pasty. Something cold and quivery touched the bare part of her right leg. Charmaine froze, not even daring to chew. This kitchen is full of big, magical slugs, she thought. The cold thing touched another part of her leg. With the touch came a very small and whispery whine. Very slowly, Charmaine pulled aside her skirt and tablecloth and looked down. Under the table sat an extremely small and ragged white dog, gazing up at her piteously and shaking all over. When it saw Charmaine looking down at it, it cocked uneven, frayed-looking white ears and flailed at the floor with its short, wispy tail. Then it whispered out, "Oh, whine again." "Oh, who are you?" Charmaine said. "Nobody told me about a dog." Grand Uncle William's voice spoke out of the air once more. "This is Waif. Be very kind to him. He came to me as a stray, and he seems to be frightened of everything." Charmaine had never been sure about dogs. Her mother said that they were dirty and they bit you and would never have one in the house. So Charmaine had always been extremely nervous about any dog that she met. But this dog was so small. It seemed extremely white and extremely clean, and it looked to be far more frightened of Charmaine than Charmaine was of it. And it was still shaking all over. "Oh, stop trembling," Charmaine said. "I'm not going to hurt you." Waif went on trembling and looking at her piteously. Charmaine sighed. She broke off a large lump of her pasty and held it down to Waif. "Here," she said. "Here's for not being a slug after all." Waif's shiny black nose quivered towards the lump. He looked up at her to make sure she really meant it. And then, very gently and politely, he took a lump into his mouth and ate it. Then he looked up at Charmaine for more. Charmaine was fascinated by this politeness. She broke off another lump, and then another, and in the end they shared the pasty half and half. That is how we know that Charmaine is a good person. "That's all," Charmaine said, shaking the crumbs off her skirt. "We'll have to make this bagful last, as there seems to be no other food in this house. Now, show me what to do next, Waif." Waif promptly trotted over to what seemed to be the back door, where he stood wagging his wisp of a tail and whispering out a tiny whine. A tiny whine. Charmaine opened the door, which was just as difficult to open as the other two, and followed Waif out into the backyard, thinking that this meant that she was supposed to pump water for the sink. But Waif trotted past the pump and over to the rather mangy-looking apple tree in the corner, where he raised a very short leg and peed against the tree. "I see," Charmaine said. "That's what you're supposed to do, not me. And it doesn't look as if you're doing the tree much good, Waif." Waif gave her a look and went trotting to and fro around the yard, sniffing at things and raising a leg against clumps of grass. Charmaine could see that he felt quite safe in this yard. Come to think of it, so did she. There was a warm, secure feeling, as if Great Uncle William had put wizardly protections around the place. She stood up by the pump and stared up beyond the fence to the steeply rising mountains. There was a faint breeze blowing down from the heights, bringing a smell of snow and new flowers, which somehow reminded Charmaine of the elves. She wondered if they had taken Great Uncle William up there. And they'd better bring him back soon, she thought. I shall go mad after more than a day here. There was a small hut in the corner by the house. Charmaine went over to investigate it, muttering, "Spades, I suppose, flower pots and things." But when she hauled its stiff door open, she found a vast copper tank inside and a mangle and a place to light a fire under the tank. She stared at it all, the way you stare at a strange exhibit in a museum, for a while, until she remembered that there was a similar shed in the back of her own yard at home. It was a place just as mysterious to her as this one, since she had always been forbidden to go into it. But she did know that once a week a red-handed, purple-faced washerwoman came and made a lot of steam in this shed, out of which came clean clothes. Somehow. Ah, a wash house, she thought. I think you have to put those laundry bags in the tank and boil them. But how? I'm beginning to think I've led a much too sheltered life. And a good thing, too, she said out loud, thinking of the washerwoman's red hands and mauve face. But that doesn't help me wash dishes, she thought. Or about a bath. Am I supposed to boil myself in the tank? Where shall I sleep, for goodness sake? Leaving the door open for Waif, she went back indoors, where she marched past the sink, the bags of laundry, the crowded table, and the heap of her own things on the floor, and she dragged open the door in the far wall. Beyond it was the musty living room again. Oh, this is hopeless. Where are the bedrooms? Where's the bathroom? Great Uncle William's tired voice spoke out of the air. For bedrooms and bathroom, turn left as soon as you open the kitchen door, my dear. Please forgive any disorder you find. Charmaine looked back through the open kitchen door to the kitchen beyond it. Oh, yes, she said. Well, let's see. She walked carefully backwards into the kitchen and shut the door in front of her. Then she hauled it open again with what she was beginning to think was the usual struggle, and turned briskly left into the doorframe before she had time to think of it as impossible. She found herself in a passageway with an open window at the far end. The breeze was coming in through the window and strongly full of the mountain smell of snow and flowers. Charmaine had a startled glimpse of a sloping green meadow and a faraway blue distance, while she was busy turning the handle and shoving her knee against the nearest door. This door came open quite easily, as if it were used rather a lot. Charmaine stumbled forward into a smell that caused her instantly to forget the scents from the window. She stood with her nose up, sniffing delightedly. It was the delicious, mildewy fragrance of old books. Hundreds of them she saw, looking round the room. Books were lined up on the shelves on all four walls, stacked on the floor, and piled on the desk. Old books in leather covers mostly, although some of the ones on the floor had newer-looking colored jackets. This was obviously Great Uncle William's study. Ooh, Charmaine said, ignoring the way the view from the window was of the hydrangeas in the front garden. She dived to look at the books on the desk. Big, fat, redolent books. And some of them had metal clasps to keep them shut, as if they were dangerous to open. Charmaine had the nearest one already in her hands when she noticed the stiff piece of paper spread out on the desk, covered in shaky handwriting. My dear Charmaine, she read, and sat herself down in the padded chair in front of the desk to read the rest. My dear Charmaine, thank you for so kindly agreeing to look after this house in my absence. The elves tell me that I should be gone for about 2 weeks. And thank goodness for that, Charmaine thought. Or possibly a month if there are complications. Oh. You really must forgive any disorder you find here. I've been afflicted for quite some time now, but I'm sure you are a resourceful young lady, and you will find your feet here quite readily. In case of any difficulty, I have left spoken directions for you wherever these seem necessary. All you need to do is speak your questions aloud, and it should be answered. More complex matters you will find explained in the suitcase. And please be kind to Waif, who has not been with me for long enough to feel secure. And please Feel free to help yourself to any books in this study, apart from those actually on this desk, which are for the most part too powerful and too advanced for you. As if I cared for that, Charmaine thought. Meanwhile, I wish you a happy sojourn here, and hope that I will be able to thank you in person before very long. Your affectionate great uncle by marriage, William Norland. Well, I suppose he is by marriage, Charmaine said aloud. He must be Aunt Sempronia's great uncle, really. And she married Uncle Ned, who is Dad's uncle, except he's dead now. What a pity. I was starting to hope I'd inherited some of his magic. And she said politely to the air, Thank you very much, great Uncle William. There was no reply, Charmaine thought. Well, there wouldn't be. That wasn't a question. And she set about exploring the books on the desk. The fat book that she had in her hand was called The Book of Void and Nothingness. Not surprisingly, when she opened it, the pages were blank, but she could feel under her fingers each empty page sort of purring and writhing with hidden magics. She put it down rather quickly and picked up one called Wall's Guide to Astromancy instead. This was slightly disappointing because it was mostly diagrams of black dotted lines with numbers of square red dots spreading out from the black lines in various patterns, but almost nothing to read. All the same, Charmaine spent longer looking at it than she expected. The diagrams must have been hypnotic in some way, but eventually, with a bit of a wrench, she put it down and turned to one called Advanced Seminal Sorcery, which was not her kind of thing at all. It was closely printed in long paragraphs that mostly seemed to begin, If we extrapolate from our findings in my earlier work, we shall find ourselves ready to approach an extension of the paratypical phenomenology. No, Charmaine thought. I don't think that we're ready. She put that one down too and lifted up the heavy, square book on the corner of the desk. It was called Das Zauberbuch. I do not speak German. Or fantasy German. Zauberbuch. Das Sie. Das Buch. That's much funnier. Das Buch. And it turned out to be in a foreign language. Probably what they speak in Ingri, Charmaine decided, but, most interestingly, this book had been acting as a paperweight to a pile of letters underneath it, from all over the world. Charmaine spent a long time going nosily through the letters and becoming more and more impressed with Great Uncle William. Nearly all of them were from other wizards who were wanting to consult Great Uncle William on the finer points of magic. Clearly, they thought of him as a great expert, or to congratulate him on his latest magical discovery. One and all of them had the most terrible handwriting. Charmaine frowned and scowled at them and held the worst one up to the light. Dear Wizard Norland, it said, as far as she could read it, your book, Crucial Cantrips, has been a great help to me in my dimensional, or was that demented, Charmaine wondered, work. But I would like to draw your attention to a small discovery of mine related to your section on Murdoch's ear. Murphy's Law? I give up, Charmaine thought. When I next find myself in High Norland, perhaps we could talk. Yours, admiringly, and Tiffany. Lord, what writing? Charmaine thought. Wizard Howl Pendragon. Oh, dear, he must write with a poker, Charmaine said aloud, picking up the next letter. This one was from the king himself, and writing, though wavery and old-fashioned, was much easier to read. Dear W.M., Charmaine read with growing awe and surprise. We are now more than halfway through our great task, and yet none the wiser. We rely on you. It is our devout hope that the elves we sent you will succeed in restoring you to health, and that we will again shortly have the inestimable benefit of your advice and encouragement. Our best wishes go with you. Yours, in sincere hope, Adolphus Rex, High Norland. So the king sent those elves. Well, Charmaine murmured, leafing through the final stack of letters. Every single one of these was written in different sorts of people's best handwriting. They all seemed to say the same thing in different ways. Please, Wizard Norland, I would like to become your apprentice. Will you take me on? Some of them went on to offer Great Uncle William money. One of them said that he could give Great Uncle William a magical diamond ring, and another, who seemed to be a girl, said rather pathetically, I'm not very pretty myself, but my sister is, and she said that she will marry you if you agree to teach me. Charmaine winced and only flipped hastily through the rest of the stack. They reminded her very much of her own letter to the king, and quite as useless, she thought. It was obvious to her that these were the kinds of letters that a famous wizard would instantly write and say no. She bundled them all under Das Book and looked at the other books on the desk. There was a whole row of tall, fat books on the back of the desk, all labeled Res Magica, which she thought she would look at later. She picked up 2 more books at random. One was called Mrs. Pensman's Path, Signposts to the Truth, and it struck her as a trifle moralizing. On the other, when she had thumbed open the metal clasp and read out as its first page was called The Book of Palimpsest. When Charmaine turned over the next pages, she found that each page contained a new spell, a clear spell too, with a title saying what it did, and below that a list of ingredients followed by numbered stages telling you what you had to do. Oh, this is more like it, Charmaine said, and settled down to read. A long time later, while she was trying to decide which was more useful, a spell to tell friend from foe, or a spell to enlarge the mind, or perhaps even a spell for flying, Charmaine suddenly knew that she had a crying need for the bathroom. This tended to happen to her when she had been absorbed in reading. Same. She sprang up, squeezing her knees together, and realized that a bathroom was the place that she had still not found. Oh, how do I find the bathroom here? She cried out. Reassuringly, Great Uncle William's kind, frail voice spoke out of the air at once. Turn left in the passage, my dear, and the bathroom is the first door on the right. Thank you! Charmaine gasped and ran. Let's see. So we are on page 40. We have read for 42 minutes. Let's see. I think I would go over time if I read another chapter. So, it is almost 10 o'clock, so it is time for me to go to bed, or else Opal will make sad noises. But I have ice cream. It's kind of funny. Apparently, lactose-free ice cream just melts, which is odd. But this is one of my favorite shirts. It is from Overly Sarcastic, which is a really, really, really good YouTube channel. I enjoy them immensely. And it's Hades and Persephone. Just having a loving evening. So she is drinking tea and he is reading a book. So, anyway, you have more important things to do than to listen to me. So, get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate without knowing a thing about you, then I can love you for exactly the same reason. Sleep well, dearest. I love you very much.